You very much for joining us. With grave concern over Israel's illegal attack on Iran, the unfolding genocide and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, and a critical eye on American imperial entanglements, Just Peace advocates, the Iranian Council Congress, and Canadian Foreign Policy Institute have organized this timely and urgent gathering, which I, Sara Farhan, am honored to moderate. With us today are legal scholars, academics, activists, and community leaders. Craig Mokhiber, Mona Ghassemi, Nasim Noroozi, Yves Engler, and Dimitri Lascaris. I will introduce each panelist more fully just before they speak. But before we begin, we must acknowledge this déjà vu moment, the long shadow cast by the United States' illegal invasion of Iraq in 2003. Justified by now debunked claims of weapons of mass destruction, the war on Iraq was not only a catastrophic breach of international law, but also a carefully orchestrated act of deception, enabled and amplified by complicit Western media that echoed Pentagon talking points. That invasion, built on falsehood and moral posturing, set into motion a legacy of regional destabilization, sectarian fragmentation, and widespread human suffering. It also made unmistakable the role of military-industrial alliances in perpetuating endless war under the guise of democracy and security. Despite public outcry, despite mass critique from scholars, academics, researchers, activists, and lawyers who debunked claims of weapons of mass destruction, the invasion persisted. And years later, the Chilcot Report, while vindicating many of our claims and highlighting the illegality of the intervention, placed no path for justice. Canada, while posturing as a moderate voice, has too often aligned itself with these imperial logics, claiming diplomacy while offering political cover to acts of aggression, most recently seen in its unconditional support for Israel's attacks on Gaza and its silence in the face of mounting international concerns. We are not speaking in a vacuum. The media campaign to prime public opinion for conflict has a long and disturbing history. Since the 1980s, Israeli intelligence and media have issued routine warnings that Iran is mere months away from acquiring nuclear weapons, a narrative that sustained fear and militarism for decades. During the Iran-Iraq War, Israel's 1981 Operation Opera, also known as Operation Babylon, targeted Iraq's nuclear reactors, striking a sovereign state that at the time was an ally to the United States. This action was justified as a, quote, preemptive measure against nuclear proliferation, end quote, but it set a precedent for unilateral violence under the cloak of security. So today, we are joined by a panel of researchers, activists, journalists, and academics, legal experts to address Israel's ongoing aggression and confront the political cowardice that fuels it. We gather to challenge the complicity of our own governments, to call out the opportunism of political elites, and to reject the media's role in beating the drums of war. We begin with Craig Mokhiber, international human rights lawyer and former senior United Nations official. He left the United Nations in October of 2023, pending a widely read letter that warned of genocide in Gaza. Mokhiber criticized the international response and called for a new approach to Palestine and Israel based on equality, human rights, and international law. He has spent 4 decades in the international human rights movement, including more than 30 years at the United Nations. He is the former director of the New York office of the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights and held senior positions in the UN in Geneva and New York. He also undertook human rights missions to dozens of countries across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, as well as Europe and Latin America. He also served as the UN Senior Human Rights Advisor in Palestine and in Afghanistan, and led a team of human rights specialists attached to the high-level mission in Darfur. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Craig. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that introduction. Thanks for inviting me to be here for this conversation. Well, I just want to address 4 or 5 points to kick us off after that excellent framing. We could just repeat everything that happened in the lead up to Iraq, and it would be equally relevant here today. But just to flesh out a few points. One is that this attack that we're seeing now is very much a product of Israeli impunity and US complicity. The Israeli regime would not be perpetrating out in the open these kinds of crimes if it weren't confident of its Western-backed impunity, its Western weapons, its Western racist ideology, if I may say so, and it is rampaging across the Middle East with that confidence. And this attack on Iran is just the latest in 20 months of bloody violence that the Israeli regime has been perpetrating. But Israel is not a lone rogue. It couldn't do this without the backing of the United States. The United States that, there's a debate in the media, will the US get involved or not? The US is already involved. I think people are catching up on this. The green light for the attack came from the US president, this surprise attack. The distraction of what I think were probably disingenuous diplomatic talks was provided by the US. The US tax dollars to finance the operation, intelligence for targeting, refueling, the weapons and ammunition for the killing, diplomatic cover for the Iranian regime, the use of US forces to help in intercepting Iranian defensive missiles, the promise of direct US military backing if Israel requires it. Obviously, you mentioned the propaganda of the media corporations that are covering for this also being provided courtesy of the US. And now it looks like the US is poised to enter the military assault directly. So, the first point is that the US is a direct co-perpetrator in Israel's crimes across the region and including in Iran, whether or not it gets involved directly now in combat operations. Secondly, this is part of a wider rampage, the purpose of which is to consolidate Israeli dominance in the region. This is not about weapons of mass destruction. This is not about nuclear reactors. This is not about human rights. This is about US-Israeli dominance in the region. And if you look at this frenzy in which the Israeli regime has been engaged for the past 20 months, it has perpetrated genocide and apartheid in Palestine, transnational terrorism with its booby-trap pagers in Lebanon, thousands of armed attacks on Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iran. It's been unlawfully occupying Palestinian, Lebanese, and Syrian territory, carrying out extrajudicial executions across the region. It most recently commandeered the humanitarian flotilla ship, the Madeleine. It's been murdering my own former UN colleagues and attacking UN facilities. It's been using its proxies in the West, in countries like Canada and the United States and the UK and Germany, to harass human rights defenders and to corrupt governments. And this is a country that has stockpiles of conventional weapons, high-tech weapons, nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, and a country which allows no international inspections of its nuclear weapons, refuses to ratify the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and yet it is pronouncing on the peaceful use of nuclear energy by other governments in the region. And of course, it is a regime that is governed by a far-right, deeply racist, fundamentally violent regime, unconstrained by any norms of international law, which is the main point that I want to make is about the law here. The law does not impress the government of Israel, clearly. If you add the ingredient of impunity to all of this, which, as I said, has been guaranteed for decades for Israel, then you have a formula for violence and ultimately for disaster that may not be contained by the boundaries of the Western Asia region. And that really, it is that impunity that has produced the serial criminality of the Israeli regime, right? If it can get away with anything, it will try anything. I mean, any lawyer can tell you that impunity feeds additional criminality, and that criminality is now threatening, not just the Palestinians, but the Syrians and the Lebanese and the Iranians and the Yemenis, and even outside the region, all of us ultimately. So the other point that I wanted to underscore was that it's not about nukes. It's about US-Israel regional hegemony, as I said. Iran is being targeted because it's the last independent state in the region because most of the Arab governments of the region have been systematically either corrupted and captured by the US and its allies or destroyed if they refuse to submit: Iraq, Libya, Syria, and so on. And Iran has been, of course, in the crosshairs for a very long time for this reason. Decades of sanctions and sabotage and aggression, destabilization efforts, meddling by Western intelligence agencies, and so on. But still, Iran has refused to submit in some very fundamental ways, which is why it is such a target today. First, despite very sustained pressure, it has refused to abandon the Palestinian people. It has refused to normalize Israeli settler colonialism and apartheid, and it has refused to accept that Israel can just openly perpetrate a genocide without any consequences. Secondly, it has refused to surrender control of its natural resources. Of course, Iran has very significant reserves of oil and gas to the US empire. This has also made it a target. And very famously now, it has refused to give up its right that all sovereign states have to develop peaceful nuclear energy for the benefit of its developing economy, which has been so damaged by US sanctions over time. So because none of that has forced the Iranian government to submit, the US and Israel have now moved to this large-scale military aggression. And as you said, Sarah, dusting off these old weapons of mass destruction justifications that served them so well in their aggression in Iraq more than 20 years ago. But they've even taken it to more absurd levels than they did in Iraq, because they're not claiming that Iran has weapons of mass destruction, but that Iran might someday acquire weapons of mass destruction, which is made, as I said, all the more ridiculous by the fact that Israel has, nuclear weapons as well as chemical and biological weapons, and as does the US, and both of them have been responsible for serial acts of aggression in the region, while Iran has not. So this makes it all the more rich to hear these kinds of justifications. The fourth point I wanted to make is, and this is not even a gray area, this is very clear. The Israeli attack on Iran is a crime under international law. This is an unprovoked attack, a treacherous one, launched in the middle of ongoing US negotiations, by the way, and even targeting the senior Iranian official who was in charge of those negotiations. And this qualifies in international law as an act of aggression. It's a violation of Article 2.4 of the UN Charter that prohibits the threat or use of force, except in situations, temporarily in situations of self-defense, where there's been an actual armed attack. There was no armed attack on Israel. It had no authorization from the Security Council, so its attack on Iran was not just a crime under international law, but it was aggression, which has been called the supreme international crime. The question for Canada is whether or not international law means anything for the Canadian government anymore, whether it's going to insist on its application with regard to those it considers its adversaries as well as their friends, or if it's going to assert a double standard that certainly can't be in the interest of the reputation of Canada or the sustainability of international law. This is not a hard case. This is an act of aggression. It is unlawful under the Charter. Now, you will hear sometimes, as George Bush liked to do, an attempt to move away from the rules of the UN Charter on aggression and talk about things like anticipatory self-defense or preemptive strikes. And you remember that they did this in the lead up to the US aggression in Iraq. That argument has been rejected very widely. Since the UN Charter was adopted prohibiting self-defense unless there is an armed attack or military forces authorized by the Security Council. Of course, Israel is not a country that respects or even recognizes international law. The Israeli regime, because it has US guaranteed impunity, doesn't care about legality. But you will notice in the media that its representatives and proxies try to adopt a veneer of legality in their propaganda efforts in Western media. You'll see it on Canadian and US and British TV trying to do so. So they have tried to distort the idea of anticipatory self-defense even further by essentially claiming that Israel has the right to attack anybody who might someday in the future decide to attack Israel. That is blatantly lawless. And yet you'll hear those arguments being made that, Iran might someday develop nuclear weapons, and if it develops them, it might use them on Israel, and therefore Israel has no choice but to act now. Well, that is not really logical when you break down the elements, and it's certainly not lawful. It is clearly impermissible under international law. If you were to accept that reasoning, it would mean that any state could attack any state at any time just by claiming a potential future threat. And that would mean no more UN charter. The entire international law of aggression would disappear. And that clearly it can't be something that is justified by anyone, least of all by Canada's lawyers. So for Israel, of course, it makes perfect sense because Israel is, as I've said, an annihilatory state. It was created through violence and it's been sustained and expanded through violence. And the entire history of Israel has been militarization, conquest, colonization, expansion, and aggression. And of course, what that has meant is genocide for the indigenous people of Palestine, constant attack on the regime's neighbors, just as it is attacking Iran now. But we need to be very clear. Iran does not have nuclear weapons, and nobody is charging that they do. There's no evidence that it is developing nuclear weapons, and the IAEA has just affirmed this again, that there is no such evidence. There's no evidence that it would use those weapons on the Israelis, even if it obtained them. There is no imminent threat that would justify any such move in international law. And by the way, the Israelis have not exhausted peaceful means as is required by international law. In sum, this is quintessential aggression. It is a crime, and very serious, the crime of crimes under international law. Now, beyond that crime of crimes, Israel's attacks have included a number of other international crimes, including attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure. They have killed hundreds of Iranians, overwhelmingly civilians, in these attacks. They have targeted apartment buildings, the media building that we all saw live streamed, and at least one hospital. And they have murdered several Iranian scientists. Now, this is a clear violation. All of these are clear violations of the principle of distinction in international humanitarian law and the prohibition of targeting protected persons and protected civilian infrastructure. The killing of scientists is such an obvious case here. You will hear in Western media talk about this as if it was some amazing tactical accomplishment to assassinate scientists. It's not. Under international law, it's murder. Scientists, except in rare cases, are civilians. In order for them not to be civilians, they would have to be formally incorporated into the military, not just working for the military, but they'd have to be military officials themselves, and they'd have to be involved in hostilities. But these scientists, including the Iranian scientists who are killed, are civilians. And they are civilians under international law, even if they're working on weapons. And these scientists were not working on weapons, they were working on nuclear energy as well. So targeting them is entirely unlawful. This is the crime of murder under international law. Similarly, targeting civilian infrastructure like these apartment buildings to kill scientists, whether civilian or military, that is a violation of the principles of precaution and distinction and proportionality, and therefore it is unlawful. Also, Israel has been attacking Iran's energy infrastructure. This is a violation of international humanitarian law, and clearly, these installations are generally protected under international humanitarian law because they're essential to civilian survival. There are only rare circumstances where they can be made military targets. For example, when soldiers are firing from the energy installation, and even then you have to apply all of the humanitarian law principles of precaution and so on. Proportionality and distinction and so on. So, but in this case, there's no allegation that anybody was firing from these. They're being destroyed in order to weaken the country, not for any legitimate military objective. And attacking those energy installations is unlawful. And then finally, the attacks on the nuclear facilities. This is considered a particularly egregious violation of international law. And it has been intentionally and openly, Israel has been intentionally and openly attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. Attacks on dangerous facilities, such as nuclear facilities, that contain what international law calls dangerous forces, are generally prohibited in international law. The International Atomic Energy Agency has again affirmed that these attacks are prohibited in international law and are a violation of the UN Charter because of the potential damage. And There are only rare circumstances, again, where you would be able legally to target these kinds of installations, and meeting the requirements of legality are almost impossible when it's a nuclear installation. You would have to have a situation where the facilities are being used for military purposes, like launching attacks on the enemy, where there's a legitimate military objective. Here, there is none. Where the attack is necessary for that objective, where an effective warning is given, so people have a chance to get out and get away, and where the military action then meets the tests of precaution and distinction and proportionality. It's almost impossible to satisfy that standard if you're going to bomb a nuclear installation, because of radiation leaks and the dissemination of those and the potential widespread impact on civilians. And just finally on this point, there is also a prohibition in international law on the use of any means of warfare that can be expected to cause widespread, long-term, and severe damage to the natural environment, which is almost guaranteed with attacks on nuclear facilities. And then finally, there is the law of neutrality in international law that requires the parties to a conflict not to cause transborder damage to a neutral state because of their use of weapons against their adversaries. And that would be a very predictable outcome of nuclear emissions if you were to attack such a thing. So, at the level of the attack itself, an act of aggression, clearly illegal. The individual attacks themselves, also illegal. And what you're getting from Western governments, what you're getting from Western-aligned media corporations is a distraction about centrifuges and nuclear reactors, when the real threat here is a rogue regime backed up by an even more powerful rogue regime, which is engaged in aggression, genocide, and impunity. And the real threat to the region and the world comes from that, and that's what needs to be contained. I'll stop there.
Wow. I'm sure we will have to return to your expertise. I can already see a lot of questions in the chat. Thank you so much, Craig. Our next speaker is Mona Ghassemi. Mona is the sitting president of the Iranian Canadian Congress, a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and non-religious organization established in 2007, to represent the interest of Iranian Canadians and encourage their participation in Canadian society. Previously, Mona served 2 years as VP, during which they were instrumental in representing ICC to Canada's public inquiry into foreign interference. As one of the very few organizations that questioned the premises of the proceedings and criticized U.S. and Israeli interference in Canadian policy. Also beginning during that period, ICC has issued multiple statements in defense of democratic human rights in Canada in the context of the ongoing genocide in Palestine. Before joining ICC's board, and particularly around the time of Trump's assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, Mona also had media appearances where they took a position against war and foreign influence in Iran. Mona has always been sympathetic to Palestinian cause and has become very involved in the solidarity movement for Palestine. Thank you so much, Mona. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I wanted to start by thanking all of the organizers, Karen from Just Peace, Yves Engler from Canadian Foreign Policy, for inviting me and for hosting this very important webinar under such short notice at this difficult time for us. And I also wanted to express my heartfelt support for all of our fellow Iranians everywhere, whether in Iran or in the diaspora, in this very difficult time. And my condolences to those who have perhaps already lost loved ones, and we're all having the same anxieties around this, as it's so close. Even though the genocide in Palestine has been going on for a year and a half plus, now it's really hitting close to home, and I could say even at home. My speech won't be very long, so I am going to just mostly cover what ICC does and what its current position is with respect to the current events. And I know Nasim has a lot to say, so I will give her my remaining time at the end. So yeah, like I said, my heart goes out to everyone, but now is not the time for thoughts and prayers, and it's really the time for action. And that's why we're gathered here to learn more about what's going on. And thank you, Craig, for giving so much of the context, legal context. That's going to make my speech even shorter because I was going to touch on some of those points that you made, but I can cut them out. So hopefully we can change the course and move Canada away from this war, and hopefully not see. Hopefully we see de-escalation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what we're doing and what are some recent actions that we're taking and how you can get involved. So like Sarah said in the introduction, we're a non-government, non-partisan, and non-religious organization, and our purpose is to advance the interests of Iranian Canadians and to also advance the participation of Iranian Canadians in Canadian civic and political life, and that includes education and so that people can be informed in their when they participate in the civic life. So with that in mind, it's very deeply hurtful when the country that we live in is risking to be at war with the country we were born in, given the position taking that Carney and his government have taken. They're quite egregious, really, and we have to be wary of that. So I think it's a very key moment for us to rally our fellow Iranian Canadians regardless of the very varying political opinions in the diaspora. None of us want our families hurt. None of us, we all have pride in the territorial integrity of Iran, and I think that it's a key moment for us. So two key positions that Iranian Canadian Congress has taken in response to the current situation is that we affirm Iran's right to defend itself according to UN Resolution 51. And we demand that Canada condemn the attacks by Israel, that is, reverse its current positioning that was issued by Carney on June 13th. And that claimed that Israel had the right to defend itself without acknowledging that actually, in fact, Israel was the aggressor, and thereby reversing cause and effect. And all those details that Craig mentioned were, show that this is actually quite I don't even know how to say how egregious this is. And I think that most people that I've been talking to definitely see past that. So furthermore, we want Canada to not follow in the steps of the US and not get involved in this war. And, there was a key moment where, because of the tariffs on the Canadian products, Canadians had more of a national sentiment separating themselves from the US. So hopefully we can carry this sentiment and not follow in those steps. And we have also in the past Prime Minister Chrétien, who was a very popular prime minister, did not follow in to engage in the war against Iraq, which is very, as we mentioned in the introduction, it's a very important thing to keep in mind as we are moving forward, because as we were talking before, some people might be mistakenly thinking that Israel is going to save us, and this is such a unfortunate position and unfortunate mistake that some people are making, that because as we have seen in the past, as we saw with Iraq, as we can also see with Syria now, and with Libya, that was surrendered its nuclear arms, or this would be very dangerous for Iran and for the people of Iran, because it again, we don't want to be under foreign rule, and this is a very dangerous steps indeed. And we see that Israel is not going to save us because they are, as was mentioned again, they are killing us. They are killing our civilians. So we're currently collaborating and working with other organizations on a number of different statements, actions, and sometimes we add in addition to our main demands that we respect with respect to the legal UN legal framework. Iran does have a right to defend itself, and this was and Iran's response to Israel was in defense of an unprovoked attack, once again in the under the circumstances of doing negotiations with the United States, which it seems were just a pretense, and that Canada, again, once again, should condemn this unprovoked attack. And sometimes we add to our statements, depending on exactly what's going on at the time. We want Canada to take every measure to put pressure on Israel through diplomatic means, through the G7, different whatever means that we can find. And in addition, we have some long-standing demands that we are highlighting, such as the reopening of diplomatic relations with Iran. We've long been looking for an end to the sanctions on the Iranian people, because sanctions kill. Sanctions are a slow war, and Iran has been under circumstances of a slow war by the United States and its allies for many years now, and isolation are not going to help the Iranian people. And we also ask for the reopening of the Iranian embassy in Ottawa. We've been asking for this for some time now. And under the current circumstances, reopening of emergency consular services. And it's because it's already difficult under normal circumstances for Iranian Canadians just to travel to visit family. And under the current circumstances, we need extreme expediency. From what I understand, Canada offered an emergency hotline for people, Canadians who were in the region, to be able to, get support. But from what I've heard, at least one of our contacts tried to use that hotline, and they were told that we don't have diplomatic relations. And so it wasn't especially helpful. Basically, they were told, oh, can I go to the border? What's going to happen? They said, oh, you need to look at the news and judge based on your own circumstances and what you see in the news. And basically, if you make to the border, you have to go to Turkey and buy your own ticket home. So it was really like, seemed like completely unhelpful advice that they received. So it's really hurtful that we are in this position, living in this country, working in this country, and contributing to this country, and yet we are not supported when we have our needs, and our lives are in danger. So that's with respect to the immediate situation. And as regards the broader situation, Iranian Canadian Congress early on, starting in October 23, as soon as we saw the escalation of the genocide in Palestine, because it's a slow genocide once again, through different means, limiting food resources and cutting off, the Gaza Strip from and having these, difficult protocols for the people. And so with the escalation of the genocide, we took a stance early on. We signed on with other organizations on various statements to call for, call for ceasefire. And so why did we do that? Because as an Iranian Canadian Congress, we have nothing to do. There's nothing in our mandate about Palestine. Well, we did that because we do support freedom and justice everywhere, and we see it in the interest of Iranian Canadians to do so and to engage in coalition building with people with whom our struggles are intertwined. because once again, when it comes like down to it, our government is not supporting us. We are treated as second-class citizens. So our struggles are intertwined with the other people who are affected by the global imperialism. So yeah, maybe not all Iranian Canadians felt that way, but we felt it was very important to so important that we needed to stand by the cause of the Palestinian people, and hopefully bring the Iranian Canadians to understand the issues better that impact them. And we also took this position because we anticipated the escalation of the war into Iran that would happen, and that now we are seeing it. And we knew that if Israel was left unchecked, we would be impacted in a more direct manner, which is what is happening now. And as we've seen, again, the government is doing very little to support us. And it seems they only support Iranian people nominally when there is something that is advantageous to them, because it's not the territorial integrity that the Western powers are interested in, but more so when there's some kind of in it for them. As we see, the war hawks are already looking for access to the oil, and they're saying that, oh, if we get regime change, we're gonna get the oil. So it's very much just based in any support they seem to offer is just based in these kind of expansionist, colonialist frameworks. So therefore, because we are not being supported by the Canadian government, we need to advocate for ourselves. And we've launched a number of campaigns, and we hope will support us as we also support anti-war activists throughout the country and echo their calls. And so we're running a couple of actions right now. We're collaborating with the Palestinian Youth Movement in a number of other cities, PYM, as well as other organizations across the country with the theme of Stop the War on Iran, or in some cases, Hands Off Iran is the title of the protest. So we have a strong presence in Montreal and in Toronto, also a presence in Ottawa in those protests in particular, and any other protests that are happening or that we can build on. We also try to participate in those, and we try to also mobilize our people in the different cities. So please show up if you can to those, and I can put the links in the chat later. And also, very importantly, we have an email, Your MP petition that is circulating. I can also share the link to that. And yeah, we've issued a media call out in collaboration with JPA and CFPI here, and with Karen and Yves. And we're also circulating in collaboration with another Iranian organization, Iranians United for Palestine. We're circulating a letter to Mark Carney. It's not a public petition yet, but we're asking organizations to sign on for now. So if you do have a peace, like a peace advocacy organization or a union or anything like that, you can also reach out to me, and I'll put my email in the chat, and it's president@iccongress.ca. And you can always also contact us at info@iccongress.ca for any kinds of requests. And thank you so much once again, and I will give my time to whoever's next.
Thank you so much, Mona. Our next speaker is Nasim Noroozi, who is a university lecturer and board member of the Iranian Canadian Congress.
Nasim's not a board member. I'm a proud supporter, but not a board member.
Okay, sorry about that, my mistake. So supporter and advocate for the ICC. Nasim's research focuses on ethics of resistance in today's colonial context. Her doctoral work specifically examined the relationship between phenomena of time, colonization, and resistance against it. She examines the common theoretical responses to mass suffering and injustice. and the potential dilemmas that such responses can entail. In her public philosophical engagement, she explores and focuses on the troubling modes of mainstream perception of dissent in Iranian opposition. Thank you so much, Nasim, and please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you everybody for inviting me. And I have my talk focus, I included a little bit of a chat GPT there and native informant. So it's a little bit different, but there's also a lot of overlap. And I think it's very important to focus on the overlap because I'm incredibly scatterbrained because of the ongoing situation and psychologically really unwell. I did manage to record it's about 14 minutes. It was 25 minutes, but then I'm just taking part of it. So I'll play it for you here, and I'm here if you have any questions that you want to ask. My talk was I wanted to provide a quick fix to people who are facing hawkish rhetoric, and they are peace activists. How should they go on, and how should they proceed in such situations? And how should activists, non-Iranian activists, deal with pro-war Iranians? Because it becomes a very tricky situation of like, all right, I'm Iranian, you're not, don't speak for me. So that's the part that I will be looking at. So a lot of discussions that are focusing on the similarities are actually pointing to how important it is to not forget. So I'll play this for you, and if you have any questions, I'm here to answer. All right, so can everybody see? Yes. All right, perfect. And can you give me a thumbs up when you hear the sound? So I saw a post on Twitter, I think, or it was on Instagram. It said, it was a quote that said, the US doesn't manufacture anything anymore. It was along these lines. And then someone had written, wrong, it manufactures consent for war. So, you know, and I think it's absolutely true. And the phrase of manufacturing consent for war is becoming more and more relevant because of the presence of Netanyahu and because of the presence of a genocidal state in the Middle East. Now, my talk centers around this. What should we do about the manufacturing of consent? Like, is there a quick solution to it when we see the manufacturing of consent online or by certain groups of people? And, you know, my solution is find the repeated patterns of the formats that war had been manufactured before. Do not budge when the conversation gets veered off by warmongers, when there are deflections that are happening. Insist on the patterns of manufacturing of consent, and I'm going to go through it, especially with the focus on historical records, precedences that have happened in the region, and most importantly, and way more important than the precedences, is how the precedences were actually the pieces of the puzzle in order to get us where we are. Right? We are living in Netanyahu's dream, and we're seeing the actualization of his dream when we look at his testimony in 9/11. So do not be afraid to repeat the key points. Unfortunately, the Israeli propaganda machine, and I hate using these terms, but they control and dominate the imagination of even a lot of progressive colleagues of mine, and a lot of like mainstream progressive Westerners by repeating the same patterns, the same talking points. So make sure you do not budge when it comes to when you're countering the deflections in order to, you know, sort of disrupt us from seeing that what is happening is a manufacturing of consent. Now, well, how do I do this? I literally use ChatGPT for this, but I'm not a hypocritical person. I often have a very honest discussion of ChatGPT with my students, so it's not banned in my classes. Let's just put it like that for now. But I literally ask ChatGPT because we're out of time for sleep and eating and everything these days. That about the claims that were created in order to manufacture consent for the Iraq War. And then I will tell you how to approach those claims when it comes to Iran. So the 5 claims that ChatGPT enumerates. Number one is weapons of mass destruction. Obviously, the claim was they asserted that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, including chemical, biological, and possibly nuclear weapons, which posed an imminent threat. Imminent threat. And the reality was extensive searches by Iraq survey group after the invasion found no stockpiles of WMDs. Also, WMD is a fallacy, using the fallacy of the big lie technique, which is something else. But this is the claim, and that's the reality. They didn't find it. The second thing was links to terrorism, right? Officials, including President Bush, suggested that Saddam had operational ties with terrorist groups, right? Particularly Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And that they said that Iraq supported terrorism. The reality was, while his regime was authoritarian, no credible evidence was found linking Iraq to 9/11 attacks or significant operational ties with Al-Qaeda, right? So the 9/11 Commission concluded that there was no collaborative relationship between Al-Qaeda and Iraq. It makes you think about the presence of ISIS and the fact that it never attacks Israel. So, let's keep that in mind. The third thing is threat to regional stability. The US argued that Iraq's actions threatened stability in the Middle East and that regime change would lead to a more stable and democratic region. Please search for Netanyahu's testimony on this. And the reason why he talks about, if we take out Iraq, Iranians next door would think that their time has come to get rid of their dictator. So it was like, we're in his dream, right? We've been in his dream of making a new Middle East. And then the reality was that the aftermath of the invasion led to significant instability, including a power vacuum that contributed to the rise of extremist groups like ISIS, which exacerbated violence and sectarian conflict in the region. All right, fourth one is humanitarian intervention. This is key. This is key when we're talking about Native informants. And I'm going to come back to this. So this is very, very important as activists and anti-war activists, how to deal with the claim of humanitarian intervention. Now, the claim was that the invasion was justified on humanitarian grounds, claiming to liberate the Iraqi people from Saddam Hussein's brutal regime. You see the repeating of the patterns: brutal dictatorship, authoritarianism, et cetera, The reality was, while the regime was indeed tyrannical and responsible for human rights abuses, critics argue that the humanitarian justification was overshadowed by the chaos that followed the invasion, leading to civilian casualties and a humanitarian crisis in Iraq. Okay, and then the last one is immediate danger. Keywords: immediate danger. The claim was that government officials portrayed Iraq as an immediate threat that had to be addressed promptly to prevent an imminent attack. I mean, it's almost insulting to our intelligences to see this being repeated, right? But the fact that it's being repeated needs to be reminded. There's no need to search for new arguments when old arguments are being used in order to contribute to mass suffering. Actually, it is urgent for us to stay with classical arguments of suffering when we see them. And the reality of immediate danger was that many intelligence assessments indicated that Iraq was not capable of launching an immediate attack, and the timeline for developing WMD capabilities was much longer than portrayed by the proponents of the war. Also keep in mind that Israel has nuclear program, and there is a strategic ambiguity strategy of like ambiguous silence or something like that. And that Iran is a member of the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and its facilities are being monitored 24 hours by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which unfortunately now seems to be complicit in war and war crimes because of the false testimony that he gave. I'm talking about Mr. Ghassemi. We're hoping to file some legal action against him, and if you can help me in any way, I'm reaching out to you. Please help me in making sure we take that forward. So these are the five things: weapons of mass destruction, links to terrorism, threats to regional stability, humanitarian intervention, and immediate danger. All right, as people who are in these situations and we want to prevent these situations, our task is this: whatever talking point comes to the fore, you can see, and it's very sad that you can see, but you can see that they actually fall exactly within one of these arguments. Like, it's impossible for them to not fall into these five claims. And this should be a warning for everybody's imagination and everybody's consciousness that your imagination is being engineered, and your imagination of what is good and what is bad and what is dangerous is constantly being engineered in order to manufacture consent for war. So this is something that is very important. The quick solution for anyone who wants to find out what position to take is to see if the arguments that are being presented, do they fall into these five claims? If they do, we're manufacturing consent for war, and your silence means manufacturing the smooth continuation of this manufacturing of consent, and your objection at least will disrupt this. Quick fix, right? 5 arguments, whatever argument is thrown at you, put it in these 5. If it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, then it's a duck, I think. So this is another issue, that this is one main approach to addressing pro-war and hawkish talking points online, especially with the people that are promoting them. Very important here. That is the idea of what we call native informants. Now, there are many people that despise the Iranian government. We're historically anti-establishment. This is a historical fact. It goes back to the Shah period, and it goes back before that as well. So, we are this kind of like, we have this tendency. So it's easier to be anti-establishment because with power comes abuse, and you see it, and it's there, and it's a very noble position that you can take, and oftentimes it is noble because you're against oppression. So obviously, there's no question that some people who are against oppression and abuse of power are rightly angry. So that's not the question here. The question is, we have a concept or a phrase called native informants in this colonial world that we live in. Native informants, for the sake of my talk here, are people who are funded by war lobbies. They're funded by, the US and the West to be the spokespeople of promoting hawkish agendas. How do they do that? Is usually they cherry pick, and they're very good at it, I have to mention. They cherry pick human rights abuses, and they constantly embolden the human rights abuses that serves their purpose. And I'm going to talk about what I mean by this. In order, like, they are the ones that the West wants to hear, right? For the manufacturing of consent to go on smoothly, right? This coincides with the white saviorism complex. And again, oftentimes it's very well-intentioned. Someone who thinks they're sitting in a democracy like Canada, on occupied territory. That's, not beside the point, but for the moment, they say, oh, let's go free some other people from the tyrants. They need to know that they are subjects of manufacturing of consent by being constantly exposed to native informants. They are people from a targeted country who say things that are pleasing to your ears, and who say things that are pleasing to the ears of hawkish policymakers. And they kind of make you silent on your objections to war. They're like, all right, if they're saying it, they're from that country, right? So there are a few things to mention here. First of all, yes, human rights abuses have happened. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately, I don't know if it's a good term, but many of the people that are talking about these things are the people that did not have that much of a rough time back home. With definitely a few exceptions, And we right now have tens of former political prisoners who have been, and I'm sort of like documenting their testimonies right now on my Instagram page, that have been to solitary confinements for many, many months. And they have had harsh sentences, and they have been under duress. But they all are coming out right now and saying that it's an internal problem. War is not the answer. Conflicts are internal and need to be solved. Like we say it's a family feud. So this is one of the ways that you can sort of like find out who's the native informant immediately when you see someone on the news talking about the mullah's regime, X, Y, Z. Check their funding, check their resources. Most likely they're working for a Washington think tank that is pro-war, or they're working for, somewhere that is funding, or somewhere that is being funded by the Iranian opposition, which itself is being funded by Israel and the US and possibly other countries in the region too. So native informants are here to sort of like as a silencer. They in the times of war, they work as a silencer for the weapons that are killing and creating mass suffering. Know them, call them out. It's very important to do that. Now, we come to the seminal problem of a white guy, or a white gal, or a white person not wanting to talk for others. And this is a very important point. And it's absolutely true, and it's something that is very valid. But there is a very important point here when it comes to speaking against mass suffering, and when it comes to justifying mass suffering based on an experience, based on a personal individual experience. I often resort to Sartre's quote, which I really like. He mentions that experience is not everything and it's not nothing. And in the case of collective punishments, in which we are complicit as taxpayers within North America and the rest of the West, through our government policies. We're talking about the personal experience of one person. To justify it is not valid, especially when it falls into one of the 5 pillars of manufacturing consent, right? So when it is, collective punishments are like war and sanctions. They target people regardless of what they believe. They take away the agency and strip away the agency from people to exercise their liberal rights and their autonomy. So when it comes to collective punishment, experience is not everything, and especially if it contributes to you being a native informant, being funded to create this particular dynamic of imagination for the minds of the Westerners. It's even unethical. It's an unethical stance, period. No questions about it. So it's beyond ridiculous to think that there is an element, there's experience of somebody can actually work as a silencer for weapons being deployed and mass suffering happen. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Nasim. Next, we have Yves Engler joining us. Yves is often dubbed Canada's version of Noam Chomsky. He's also considered one of Canada's most important voices on the left. He is the author of 13 books, very critical readings. I recommend you check out his website for deep engagement. And one of his most recent works is co-authored with Owen Schalk, titled Canada's Long Fight Against Democracy. Please go ahead, Yves.
Thanks a lot for organizing, Karen, and for organizing this, and Mona and Sarah for hosting this, and others for participating, and everyone for being on. I have to say I agree with Craig's assessment. This is not about anything except for a regional hegemony. This is about a long-standing Zionist policy of destroying any state that is in the region that is not completely compliant to Israel. This goes back to 56 with the invasion of Egypt. This is whether it was probably even worse from Israel's perspective. It would be if it was a secular government that was putting money, resources into its people and not following orders in the region. So that's what this is about. And we should obviously resist this completely. Now, from the Canadian government's perspective, there is just hypocrisy going all around. I'm not going to get into Canada's support for Israel and Zionism, which is a century-plus long project, and I can get into all kinds of elements. People want to get into it in the question and answer period. Just right now, if Canada followed its own laws with regards to foreign recruitment, with regards to the War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity Act, with regards to registered charities, with regards to arms exports, it would go a long way in reining in Israel's criminality. So just upholding Canadian law, let alone all kinds of other elements. But I'm going to leave that aside. Now, on this question of Iran more narrowly, there's all kinds of hypocrisy when Canadian officials talk about Iran's nuclear program. Well, why doesn't the Canadian government support the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is backed by most of the world? Canada's been opposed to that. Why hasn't the Canadian government supported efforts that Iran supported for a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East, right? Canada doesn't support that. Canada has opposed or been ambivalent towards efforts in that direction because Israel, of course, opposes it because it has nuclear weapons, because the US also opposes it because it sometimes sends nuclear weapons to the region. So the Canadian government's hypocrisy on the nuclear question, we never hear talk about Israel's known stockpile of nuclear arms. What we've seen in the last week or so of Canadian government statements, as Mona mentioned, is flipping the order of things and blaming Iran for responding to Israel's active aggression. We see that also with the G7 summit. The Canadian government did have some leverage if it wanted to assert that leverage. It had some leverage to try to use the G7 summit as a way to rein Israel in. Instead, the G7 statement provides support for Israel. We talk about this unwavering support. That's the wording that we see from Anita Anand, our foreign minister. And we have this Canadian government that, in its diplomatic comments, are basically justifying Israel's acts of aggression, which have killed a couple hundred civilians at least in Iran, and they clearly have a plan to go much further. Now, this is not surprising, right? Like when Israel blew up Iranian diplomatic compound in Damascus a year or so ago, they blew out windows at the Canadian embassy, which was closed. The Canadian government said nothing about this clear violation, Israel's clear violation of international law. This is longstanding. In the previous rounds, much lesser rounds of tit for tat, rockets and whatever between Israel and Iran. Same dynamic. Canada blames Iran for responding to Israel's acts of aggression. There are probably some Canadian soldiers that are assisting Israel in its attacks. We know that the US is assisting Israel in all kinds of different ways, which have been laid out in part by Craig, refueling, all kinds of intelligence, shooting down Iranian missiles. Canada has dozens and dozens, hundreds, it's a bit unclear, but hundreds of Canadian soldiers in the Middle East, in West Asia, assisting US bases. There's the Operation Foundation, where there's 18 Canadians as part of CENTCOM's focus on the region, a handful of Canadians in Bahrain, in Qatar, in Jordan, and at the facility in Tampa, Florida, assisting. There's Canadians, part of the US naval patrolling of the region in Bahrain. There's a Canadian base in Kuwait. So almost for sure, there's at least some Canadians through NORAD. NORAD, hundreds of Canadians are part of NORAD. NORAD provides intelligence support for US operations globally. This goes back, 67 years since the beginning of NORAD, assisting US military operations around the world, US aggression around the world. So there's probably some Canadian military assistance taking place for Israel's operations. And we know that the Canadian military has significant ties with the Israeli military. I would say the more significant Canadian role in all this is in terms of the diplomatic isolation of Iran, which has emboldened Israel to act in this way, right? The Canadian government breaking off relations with Iran 13 years ago, the Canadian government listing Iran as a state sponsor of terror. The Trudeau government said they were going to restart diplomatic relations. They began the process, and basically it was kiboshed by the Israel lobby, working through Anthony Housefather and Michael Levitt, who were then in the Liberal caucus. Canada listing the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization about a year ago. This is outside of, like, the diplomatic relations. This is Canada's just with the US in this. Most of Europe, even countries that are generally hostile to Iran, have not taken these types of measures like Canada has. All kinds of sanctions, Mona mentioned this, all kinds of sanctions against Iran, all designed to demonize, to isolate Iran diplomatically. 5.5 years ago, there was a terrible tragedy that I think the US actually has a lot to blame for, which was Iran shooting down the Flight 752. And basically, there was lots of Iranian Canadians on that flight. The Canadian government, Canadian officials have used that, even though it was clearly an error, certainly to be blamed, Iranian officials to be blamed, but it was the U.S. assassinating General Soleimani in Iraq that was the context that led to this error and this disaster. And Canadian officials have basically been using this for the last 5 years to demonize Iran. And they basically, even like the premier of BC, Ebi, the NDP premier, in January 12th, they turned the day for mourning of air disasters. It's basically the day to demonize Iran. That's what it's become in Canada. So Canada has participated in a quite aggressive form of this isolation and demonization of Iran that has helped Israel be able to do what it's trying to accomplish. Now, Canadian officials sometimes talk about democracy, sometimes they talk about human rights. Now, just a quick look at Gaza and their assistance to Israel's Holocaust in Gaza, the just complete and utter destruction of Gaza and stomping on any conception of international law shows that this is obviously hypocrisy. The Canadian government doesn't care about international law or democracy. But in the Iranian case, it's clear, right? There's history here that is not talked about basically by anyone, where Canada assisted the U.S. and Britain in destroying Iranian democracy, right? Canada supported the British embargo against Iranian oil after the nationalization of Mossadegh in 51. The Canadian government demonized the elected prime minister. The Canadian government, while the US and UK were working to destabilize and ultimately overthrow, Canada was going along with this. And you have internal comments of Canadian officials making that clear that they supported this. So like I said, they supported the oil embargo to weaken the government. And then they never criticized the coup afterwards, the overthrow of democracy. They began relations with Iran not long after the ouster of Mossadegh. And then they deepened ties to the Shah that was put in. And over the next 26 years, Canada's relations to the repressive government just deepened, and you had the Premier of Ontario traveling to Iran. You had Canada selling weapons, even while the Savak, the brutal internal force, was repressing dissent. So the Canadian government has not shown some desire for democracy or human rights in Iran. They use that to target and weaken a government that is not following the orders of Washington and Tel Aviv in the region. And so I think that's some of the history that is important for us to understand when making sense of Canadian policy towards Iran today. And I think it's just absolutely vital. I mean, over the past 20 months, we have seen a Israeli government that has attacked Lebanon, Syria, expanded in the West Bank, bombed Yemen, obviously the horrors in Gaza, and now this effort in Iran. And it's imperative that we do everything we can. I see a situation. I think Trump is started backing away. I think his MAGA base splitting on this suggests there's a real possibility that Trump is sort of backing away a little bit here. He's getting maybe a bit cold feet of joining fully in this Israeli war, and it's imperative that we do everything we can here to put pressure on the Canadian government. Obviously, this weekend there's important demonstrations. People need to come out and demand an end to Canadian complicity in Israel's war on Iran. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You elaborated on key points about Canada's so-called peacekeeping historical role, but also the contradictions embedded in that. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dimitri Lascaris, who is a lawyer, journalist, and the host of Reason to Resist. Please go ahead, Dimitri.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and a great note of appreciation to the organizers who not only did a lot of work to put this event together, but who are fighting for the cause of justice every day and have been doing so for a very long time. And I'm privileged to have been invited here to speak along these fine guests with them. I've had the privilege of acting as legal counsel to the Iranian Canadian Congress on a couple of occasions. I've witnessed firsthand how this organization has come under vicious attack repeatedly from neocons, militarists, military corporations, and bigots simply because the organization advocated for peaceful relations between Canada and Iran. It's been one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life as a Canadian citizen to see how this wonderful organization has been so mistreated by the Canadian establishment for so absurd a reason. I mean, no person of conscience would take issue with a desire to reduce the prospects of war. This is a courageous organization. It's done so much to promote détente between Canada and Iran at considerable cost, reputational expense to the leaders of the organization. And I say to you that the ICC deserves the support of all Canadians of conscience above all else, whether or not, the Canadian question happens to be of Iranian origin. At times such as these, when the world stands on the precipice of World War III and may well be in World War III as we speak tonight, our highest priority as persons of conscience should be to de-demonize the so-called enemy. And fortunately, I was able to travel to Iran for the first time in my life weeks before this criminal war of aggression was launched on the country, and saw, at least, to a limited degree in the time that was available to me, what Iran is like today. And although I was able to remain there for only 1 week, and although I did not have the opportunity to leave the capital, Tehran, I believe I saw and heard and experienced enough to tell you something probably isn't going to surprise most people on this call, that we Westerners have been lied to relentlessly about this extraordinary country. Now, before I share some observations about Iran with you, let me be clear that my goal in saying these things is not to immunize its government from criticism. No government should be immune from criticism, including, of course, our own governments. But the idea that the government of Iran is uniquely evil or evil at all, especially when you compare its conduct to that of our own governments, is preposterous, frankly. On the contrary, no governments in the world today, and let us be clear about this, have demonstrated more evil, more depravity, more savagery and barbarism than have our own governments here in the West during the past 20 months. And in fact, going back many decades. Perhaps the only thing that distinguishes the past 20 months over the entire post-World War II period of shocking satanic behavior on the part of Western governments is the audacity with which they have carried out their crimes through their instrument, Israel, during the past 20 months. Now, they're clearly in no position to lecture anybody about democracy, international law, or human rights, and I spit on their lectures, as do most people in the world today. We've had enough. So in that spirit, please allow me to share with you what I observed in Tehran during my 1 week there in early May. The first thing that I noticed about the Iranian people, and again, like I don't purport to have met such a broad cross-section that I can generalize about the population. All I can do is speak to my own personal experiences. And what I found over and over again is that the people with whom I interacted in Tehran were courteous, they were respectful, they were humble, and they were hospitable. And I want to give a particular shout out to a young man who is a journalist at Press TV. His name is Alireza Akbari. Alireza was assigned to me by the organizers of the Sobe Media Festival to be my guide during the time that I was in Tehran. He was always at my disposal for any assistance that I might have needed for any purpose whatsoever. He taught me a great deal about his country in the short time that I got to know him. And as I say, that he worked as a journalist for the state broadcaster. And since the Western-backed savages bombed the facilities, the complex of the state broadcaster in northern Tehran, I've been unable to reach Alireza, despite several efforts to get in contact with him. And I was in regular contact with him until that bombing happened. So I fear for his safety. And if he's out there today, I want him to know my thoughts are with him, and I hope that we'll have the opportunity to speak again soon. Now, another observation that I had, other than the wonderful disposition of the Iranian people, was that there was almost no police presence in Tehran. And bear in mind that when I was there, the country was under a threat to an extraordinary degree. And yet I saw perhaps 5 police officers, and I'm not exaggerating, 5 uniformed police officers the entire time I was there. They were all directing traffic, and none of them was wearing a firearm or even a baton or a taser. None of them was wearing a bulletproof vest. And all of them were interacting with their fellow citizens in a respectful manner. I saw almost no military presence whatsoever in Tehran. I think I saw one soldier who was armed, and that was at the entrance to a government facility, a nuclear reactor facility to which we were invited in Tehran. I did see a few soldiers in a park sitting on a blanket reading a book without any weapons on them. But that was it. That was the whole time, the whole experience I had, or observations I had with respect to a military presence. Now, contrast that to what we see in the West. You land at a major airport in a major Western city, you almost invariably are going to see soldiers and security personnel who are heavily armed wearing bulletproof vests. You can't move around a large major Western city without seeing militarized cops all over the damn place. I've been to protests in the West, peaceful protests, where the cops outnumbered the protesters. I saw no such thing in the time that I was in Tehran. When I was in Tehran, I did not see any homeless people. That's not to say that they don't exist, that they're not there. I can't comment on the extent of homelessness in Tehran. I'm certainly no expert in the subject. But all I can tell you is that when I walk the streets of any major Western city today, I see homeless people everywhere. In Ottawa, the capital of Canada, it's a national disgrace. You're standing 100 meters from Parliament, and you see people in the streets, sleeping in the streets, people who are obviously suffering from substance abuse, people who have mental health difficulties, and they're not receiving the treatment that they deserve. A stone's throw from the national legislature. Every day, these people who purport to represent us go to work. They see these things and they do nothing about them. I saw none of this when I was in Tehran. When I was in Tehran, no one tried to impose any restrictions on my activities. Although Ali was assigned to be my guide, there were many times that I left the hotel and walked the streets of Tehran alone. I was not required to advise anybody of my whereabouts. I was not required to limit my activities in any way or to say anything that I wasn't inclined to say, or refrain from saying anything that I was inclined to say. I was asked to actually give a speech at the university, the Islamic Republic University of Broadcasting, where I predicted, and I'm sad to say that I was right about this, that Israel, with the backing of the United States, was about to attack Iran. But I didn't tell them beforehand what I intended to say, and I wasn't vetted in any way. For all they knew, I was going to walk into that room in front of a bunch of graduate students at the university and criticize their government. But they made no attempt to restrain me in terms of what I said. I feel, frankly, freer to speak my mind in the non-Western world, in all the countries that I visited in the non-Western world in the last several years, than I feel in the West. In fact, I was concerned that when I returned to Canada after an absence of several months, that like several comrades of mine in the anti-imperialist community, I would be interrogated at the border by CSIS agents. Fortunately, that has not happened to me yet, but given current trends, it's becoming increasingly dangerous to be a critic of foreign policy in the West. All the government officials that I spoke with in Tehran spoke the language of diplomacy and restraint. I spoke with the spoke the representative of the international or the Iranian Atomic Energy Organization. I spoke with a brigadier general of the Iranian Aerospace Forces. I spoke with the director of the international arm of the State Broadcasting Organization. And there were other government officials with whom I spoke. In every single case, I found them to be true diplomats. Something that's an art form that we appear to have lost in the West. All we know is the language of belligerence and demonization and existential threats. Last and most importantly, Iran's government today and its people are unquestionably on the right side of history and on the right side of human decency. Whereas Iranians and their government embrace support for the Palestinian people, our governments are facilitating, enabling, protecting, and lying about the most audacious genocide in the history of humanity, arguably. What position are we in to criticize the government of this nation and its people and to lay waste to their country when our governments, who purport to speak in our name, are perpetrating a genocide before the eyes of the world? This is a disgrace beyond words. And so for that reason alone, I stand with the Iranian people, that they're on the right side of the history of this titanic struggle that is occurring today between the forces of imperialism and humanity. I completely agree with Craig's observations that Israel's criminal attack on Iran has nothing to do with Iran's alleged program to develop nuclear weapons. The annual threat assessment of the US intelligence agencies in early 2025 was that Iran was not seeking to develop a nuclear weapon. And even if it were, who are the Americans and the Israelis who have threatened Iran with their nukes and their conventional weapons for so long to lecture the Iranians about whether or not they can have a weapon to deter the kind of attack we're seeing upon them today? If anything, the behavior of our governments has incentivized the government of Iran to develop a nuclear arsenal. They've done everything they can to avoid having to develop a nuclear arsenal. But when they look to Southeast Asia and they see that North Korea has not been subjected to this sort of depravity after it developed a nuclear arsenal, the natural conclusion that anyone would draw is that the only way to protect your people from this kind of savagery is to nuclearize. That's the lesson that we are teaching, inadvertently or advertently, to the government of Iran through the crimes of our governments. Sadly, even though Tulsi Gabbard, somebody with whom I have disagreements, had the courage to say what intelligence agencies in the US have been saying for 20 years or more, that Iran is not trying to develop a nuclear weapon, this incompetent buffoon, this bloodthirsty genocidal warmonger, Donald Trump, cavalierly dismissed her opinion on Air Force One a few days ago and said, I don't care what she says. Now, if that doesn't prove that Craig is correct when he says that it isn't about Iran's nuclear arsenal or purported efforts to develop one, I don't know what can prove it. And the last thing I want to say, and it's to reiterate what our comrade Yves just had to say, we can help to put a stop to this, but we need to mobilize. I was born during the Vietnam War, and I'm old enough to remember that millions of people took to the streets, not just in the United States, but throughout the West, to bring an end to that barbarism. And I fear that the reason why we're seeing so little opposition today to this type of cataclysmic war that our government is fomenting, our governments throughout the West are fomenting, is that we have become comfortable in the belief that we ourselves or our sons, our daughters will not be called upon to fight these wars, as was the case in the Vietnam War. Quite apart from the fact that that's inhumane, that approach, that it's okay, for our governments to foment unjust wars when it's other people's sons and daughters who will die fighting them. Quite apart from the immorality of that, I find that to be rather naive. Sooner or later, if we allow our governments to get away with what they're doing now, this will come back to haunt us at home, and it's already begun to haunt us at home. Our societies are becoming increasingly fascistic, and they will become even more fascistic if we continue to give our governments and their proxies impunity for their crimes. So please, everybody, I know many of the people on this call have already expended enormous energy in protesting the crimes and the depravity of our government. But if you can do more in that regard, and if you can encourage people in your circle of friends, your colleagues, to join the struggle, please do that before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. Thank you to all of the panelists. We have gathered some questions from our registrants, as well as right now we've collected a few exciting ones in the Q&A. And I think to get us going, I just want to start off with a spicy one, if I may. As a historian of the modern Middle East, we have always looked critically at international law. We've looked critically at the United Nations, as this is an apparatus of a continuity of colonialism under the auspice of preventing global catastrophe. So here we are seeing that veneer peel away. So what order really is operating here? Because we know, at least in the context of the Global South, that the United Nations and its Security Council is there to punish the Global South. It's not there to protect it or to establish any ethos. But what is, I guess, this is an existential question. What is order, having witnessed repeatedly through the lens of the Global South, that it doesn't exist, that laws are there only to punish us in the context of the Global South, not necessarily to establish a semblance of peace, etc.
I see Nasim has her hand up.
Sorry, please go ahead, Nasim.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
All right, perfect. I'm having internet connection problems. This is a question I actually posed Dr. Ilan Pape in March of this year in a conference that he graciously attended. We were panelists together. I actually asked, what should we do at this point? Treaties for colonizers are not written to be upheld, they are written to be broken. So, and then, when it comes to the issue of the JCPOA, Trump pulled out of the deal. I mean, I swear, this guy has been in my life, this Trump, for like 11 years and has been affecting every layer of my existence. And I still was posing this question to Dr. Pape, saying that, what should we do? Like at this point, should we give up the rule of law, or the international rule of law? Getting more radical in the sense of leaving the negotiating table is exactly what Israel wants at the same time, because it really falls into and it matches the portrayal of, oh, the savages who are becoming more radical. So this is a trap. It's a double bind, right? We were at the negotiating table when this happened. And Dr. Pape had a very good answer, which I still am thinking about. He said, as academics, we need to redefine what universal means. And I still don't have a solid solution to the solution he proposed. I don't have an actionable proposal to it, but I think he's right. I think we gave up on the idea of universality too early. And you see a lot of anti-Zionist Jewish advocates for Palestine have an amazing motto. They say, never again means never again for everybody. So regardless of how difficult it is, and regardless of the fact that the rules were not written for us, I mean, I think the EU, the president at some point just
blurted the fact that he said, "Oh, we created the ICC for African criminals, not for people that are one of us." So I am aware of this, and so I'm not shooting from a naive perspective, but I do think that we should not give up that idea of universality yet, and we should still use it to our leverage in whatever way possible. Now, Iranians are going back at the negotiating table, and I applaud them for this because they are working in concordance with the military that is defending our airspaces. So my position is that we do not have the luxury of giving up on the universality of this international whatever that has betrayed us and stabbed us so many times, given all the traps that I mentioned. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Craig, please go ahead, and maybe Dimitri, you can also chime in afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think on the one hand, if we wait for some international institution or process to save us and deliver justice, we will be waiting for Godot. That's not coming. It's not going to happen, right? I think on the other hand, to throw out the baby with the bathwater in any political movement such as ours would be a huge mistake as well. You know, people throw the whole international system into one big basket and assume it's a thing, and it's not. I mean, we have on the one hand the US empire and all of the pieces that attach to that, and the rhetoric that they use, like the rules-based international order. That's not a thing, a rules-based international order. That doesn't exist in international law. That's just something that they made up, which basically means imperial law. It means we decide what the rules are. That's not the rule of law. That's not international law. That's something else. That's the enemy. That's the thing to be opposed in a norm-based order that cares about equality and human rights and development and peace and all of those good things. Then you've got the official institutions of international law, like the United Nations, which is a huge mixed bag, because it's not just one UN. There is the UN, that is the Security Council, which is by design an unfair institution that was precisely set up to put the power principally in the 5 victors of the Second World War, but has become really a tool of oppression, of imperialism, of selective justice, according to what they decide. But that's not the only UN. I mean, you know, there's also the UN of the independent human rights mechanisms of, you know, Francesca Albanese, the special rapporteur on Palestine, of the other special rapporteurs, of the work around the right to development and economic and social rights. There is the UN of 1945, which was a very imperial mechanism. But then there's the UN of 1975, when all of the decolonized peoples and countries took their seat at the table and changed dramatically what that mechanism was used for. And those countries fighting for liberation, fighting against apartheid and so on, they used international law and international institutions as a part of their struggle, not as their whole struggle. They used armed resistance, they used political movements, we used international solidarity, but they also engaged in this battle for legitimacy by using international law, international institutions, and so on, just as, you know, the Palestinian people have, just as the Iranian people have, and so on. So I think, you know, it's true. Was it Audre Lorde who said that, you know, the master's tools will never be used to dismantle the master's house or whatever, but the master's hammer can give him a black eye. And so we have to use whatever tools are available to us, recognizing the struggle is political always, but that there are elements of that that can be used to our benefit without being so naive as to think that it's going to deliver justice. In the end, these norms and standards of human rights and equality and development, all those sort of things, enforcement is up to us. It's up to social movements, it's up to unions, it's up to people, it's up to civil society, it's up to those who are going to dissent and disrupt and demand more. Left to their own order, you know, mechanisms and governments with power will always do the wrong thing, always. So I think it's up to us, but we can use these tools.
Thank you so much. We had a few questions about enforcement, so that also tackles that. Thank you. Dimitri, anything to add from a legal perspective?
I'm embarrassed to say I forgot the question. If you could repeat it.
It was it's basically a critique on the genesis of international law as a tool to punish the global South rather than protect it. And we're seeing the veneer sort of peel.
Right. The only thing I would add to the excellent observations of my colleagues is that we can't ultimately have an effective international legal system when a handful of powerful states, particularly three that are bent on global hegemony, the United States, Britain, and France, have the power to veto the will of the international community. So if we can't reform the United Nations to divest them of that veto power, all of the permanent members, not just those three, and also develop a more equitable voting system in the General Assembly, where tiny little fanatically pro-Western entities like Micronesia and Vanuatu have the same voting weight as China and India, which is a grotesquely unfair situation. We would have to have some kind of system of weighted voting, it seems to me. If we can't do that within the current confines of the United Nations, then I think we need to pursue other institutional structures, perhaps new ones. And I agree with Craig that that doesn't mean that the United Nations has nothing good to offer. It still has many good things to offer. But clearly it has proven itself to be completely ineffectual in terms of enforcing international law. And if it can't be done through the United States, United Nations, we have to find other institutional mechanisms to do that.
Great. Thank you so much. We have two questions about the G7, specifically regarding the bizarre statement that the G7 recently put out. One is, can we assume that this will be another NATO war? And the second question is, Gutierrez was at the G7. Why hasn't the UN been at least vocally oppositional?
Because it's been co-opted by the West. That's my answer. Guterres is more, I wouldn't say he's totally lacking in independence, but he's clearly, I think, biased in favor of Western power. And he's proven that in spades during this war on the Palestinian people and now this war of aggression against Iran.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, the countries, Germany has been providing lots of weapons to Israel, the UK, Canada, France have provided all kinds of diplomatic support. So the idea that the G7 is supporting Israel is not a particularly big surprise. The protests in Calgary was genocide 7 was how they framed it, which I think was good framing. So now, could the Canadian government, if it wanted to rein Israel in, could it have used the platform for something a minimum a little bit less bad? I think that is possible. But I think that I think there is some division though. Also, I don't think France. I think France is a bit uncomfortable, bit worried about where this may go. I think maybe the same thing could be said with the UK government right now, and probably even a little bit with the Canadian government, Japanese government, in terms of this is there have been Biden administration, Democratic governments, Democratic administrations in the U.S. that have not wanted Israel to do this. So I don't think that this is not necessarily a completely new thing from Israel's perspective in terms of attacking Iran. They are taking advantage of some dynamics that have changed in their favor or their perceived favor. But there is, I think, division within the G7 about how far to go in assisting and backing Israel in this imperial operation that could go sideways, not sideways just from a simple sort of like moral standpoint, but sideways from a G7 power in the world standpoint.
Thank you. Any other? Oh, sorry, Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think the G7 statement says it all. I mean, these are co-perpetrators, many of them, the British, the French, obviously, the Americans are literally co-perpetrators of the genocide. in Palestine. And this war with this attack on Iran is obviously not unrelated to the genocide in Palestine. I mean, as I described it, it's a part of a regional assault on the part of Israel and its backers, right? So if I saw a G7, I mean, this statement, the absurdity of beginning a statement when you have Israel perpetrate an act of aggression on Iran, and the G7 starts its statement with, quote, Israel has a right to defend itself, gives away the entire game. These are not neutral parties. These, I mean, the most absurd thing that we've seen in recent years is the U.S., right up until the bombs started dropping on Iran, the U.S. acting like a mediator of some kind. The U.S. is not a mediator. It is a party to the genocide. It is a party to the aggression on Iran. It is a party to the attacks, across the region. And, for all of the shortcomings of the UN, the G7 is by definition a part of the problem. I mean, it's the imperial side of international organization without all of the trappings of something else. So, I mean, that's what we're up against. And, just Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, and other senior political voices in the UN have been absolutely shameless throughout the genocide in Palestine, and they've been shameless in addressing the aggression on Iran as well. Today, he couldn't even bring himself to call directly for a ceasefire. Instead, he used some language, probably vetted by the G7, about something leading to a ceasefire. So you've got an act of aggression, a gross violation of human rights, a direct breach of the UN Charter for which Antonio Guterres is responsible, and he can't even call for a ceasefire. Of course, he padded it with all sorts of, calls for a diplomatic solution and so on, but just call for a ceasefire. We're not asking for so much. And he's unable to do so correctly so, because he is, I'm afraid, too captured by the West.
Thank you very much. Here in Canada, there was a report that was leaked that the RCMP was investigating Canadians who have been going to and participating in the genocide in Gaza. Soon thereafter, Deborah Lyons posted a picture with President Herzog saying no such investigation is taking place. So clearly Canada is quite complicit. We also are involved in building the machinery that's dropping the bombs. The question here, I guess, is about how do we hold our governments accountable? And we've received one regarding Greece's responsibility to arrest Netanyahu. We received one regarding our role in Canada to pressure our community, our local politics, but also our federal politics. So lots of questions about what can we do materially to hold our governments accountable.
Well, I mean, the good thing from an activist standpoint is there's lots of things that we can do because we are so complicit in Israel's crimes, right? So there's lots of targets, there's lots of things that we can demand. I'm of the opinion that if Canada just upheld its own laws when it comes to Israel, that would go a significant way in lessening Canadian contribution to Palestinian dispossession. We have, Karen has been the leading person in this country by a large margin in going after these registered charities in Canada that are violating existing Canada Revenue Agency rules around assisting the Israeli military, West Bank settlements, racist organizations, municipalities, all these things that are currently against the rules for charities. There's dozens of them doing it, and they're sometimes raising tens of millions of dollars to do this. In Hesek Foundation, last 20 years, $200 million subsidized by all of us to support the Israeli military. There's been campaigns around the Foreign Enlistment Act, right? There's all these institutions in Canada who have been inducing Canadians to join the Israeli military in violation of Canada's Foreign Enlistment Act. The RCMP won't take it seriously. There was an effort, a legal effort, to have a private prosecution on the matter. It moved forward around this one group, Sarel, and then the prosecution took over the case and dropped the case. And so there's legal element. There's complete impunity complete's too strong a word, but there's significant impunity within the legal system, legal exceptionalism when it comes to Israel around the Foreign Enlistment Act, around the War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity Act, the RCMP. It's just a complete double standard between what they do with regards to Ukraine and what they've done with regards to Gaza. We know there are tens, dozens and dozens, hundreds probably of Canadians who've been involved in this genocide in Gaza. So that's all, campaigning work that needs to be done. Obviously, the arms embargo question is the one that's been the most on. There's been a little bit of success on that front. But it's just campaigning. I mean, there's a legal side to it. I think there are legal avenues, but mostly it's political campaigning that just is relentless, has to be relentless. And there's no real easy answer to it, but it's be engaged, is going to the demonstrations like this weekend around Hands Off Iran. It's the demonstrations regularly around Palestine, the email campaigns, education, the actions, the disruptions, the office occupations, all of that, just more of it. There's no easy solution. It's a lot of work.
Craig, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to agree with Yves on that. I want to say a couple of things. One is, don't forget that Israel is on trial for genocide in the International Court of Justice. And there are provisional orders that have been issued by the International Court of Justice that have implications for all UN member states, including Canada. And it needs to be reminded of that. The calls that we are making are not fringe calls. They're calls for Canada to respect international law, its obligations. Secondly, Israel, its leaders have been indicted for crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court elsewhere in the Hague, imposing responsibilities, of course, on parties to the Rome Statute, on other states as well, by extension. Again, this is coming from the highest criminal court in the world, and it's not just coming from us, right? And so those demands are right. The UN General Assembly has overwhelmingly passed resolutions demanding that the findings of the International Court of Justice on the obligation of all states to cut off all relations with Israel, that whether they are diplomatic or political or economic or trade or financial, that relate to the occupied territories, is an obligation of member states. And it's not coming from us, it's coming from international law. So those reminders, but I think Yves is right. In the end, and I'll go back to what I said before, it's up to us. So, we can provoke legal action, including civil and criminal action. It won't always succeed, but that constant accountability push that makes people know that they are not safe if they are complicit in these kinds of crimes, I think it's important. Boycott, divestment, sanctions, pushing BDS at every opportunity, pushing the military embargo, which I think flows directly from what the International Court of Justice has said. And demonstrations are still very important in numbers to show our dissent, educating people, because we're up against a massive wall of propaganda in corporate media and from governments that paints an entirely false picture to people. So it's our job to educate people. And I believe in disruption and civil disobedience when you're talking about something like bombing a country, when you're talking about something like genocide, when you're talking about crimes against humanity, that, in the moral order of things, respecting a stop sign does not raise to the same level as stopping a genocide. So disruption, I think, is an important part as well. There has to be a denormalization of aggression, a denormalization of genocide, a denormalization of empire.
I would like to add a few words, if I might, on this question. I have a strong feeling about this. What I think, if people are looking for ways to contribute, they have to look no further than Yves Engler. Yves Engler is a one-man disruption machine. If you gave me 10,000 Yves Englers, I could make life really, really uncomfortable for people in positions of power. And I can't commend Yves enough for being this fearless voice. They hate him. You can see every time he confronts some politician in some public space, they want to strangle him because he just won't stop speaking truth to power. And I don't think appeals to their conscience is going to work because I really doubt that they have a conscience. I don't think peaceful protest is, I think it's good in terms of communicating to the oppressed that we care about them. That's very important. But I don't see much evidence that that's actually affecting government policy. I think we have to make these people feel very uncomfortable with their decisions. We have to shame them. We have to name them. We can give them no peace. One of the most effective forms of protest, I thought, was when people of conscience stood outside the home of Antony Blinken and his Canadian counterpart, Melanie Joly, and the political elite just went crazy. Oh my God, how can you do this? It's harassment. You shouldn't be imposing this on our families, blah, blah, blah. When they react this way, you know that your action is having an impact upon them. And that's why they can't stand Yves so much. So I would recommend that you get out there and disrupt, obviously in a non-violent manner. They'll try to make you feel, guilty for doing that. And I know it's difficult. It's a stressful thing to do, especially because the cops, are prone to, put their dirty paws on you and drag you away for the crime of asking people tough questions. But I think that's what we need more than anything. We need peaceful, relentless disruption.
Thank you so much. I think we're almost out of time, but I'll throw a question for Mona because I want to hear your voice on this. I'm sort of rewrapping the question. So there are influential Iranian Canadians as well as Iranian Americans who are advocating and encouraging this intervention for political gain, et cetera, et cetera. We've seen the same with Ahmed Chalabis in Iraq, for example, and a group of exiled Iraqis that were advocating for similar measures. So in your opinion, Mona, what should we take away from this? And what do you see playing out? What can we do to either disrupt this effort to further kind of or indigenize the intervention, if you will? What can we do to tackle that?
So, sorry, I was focused on trying to answer some of the questions by text, but yeah, so I'm seeing hopeful change within the community that is disrupting those narratives of sort of the white savior narratives and the once again, Israel going to save us kind of thing, because unfortunately there's a lot of propaganda that has when Netanyahu directs his speeches towards Iranian people and saying that we're on your side and all of this. Iranian people have many difficulties and many challenges, let's say, both in the diaspora and within Iran. And I think that sometimes, unfortunately, some people fall for those propaganda. But I think we're seeing a lot of young people in the Western Hemisphere, especially like the second generation Iranian Canadians and Iranian Americans, who are seeing past that because they come to Canada and they learn about Indigenous struggles here, about police brutality here, and about all of these things that challenge that, let's say, Western superiority narrative. So we call it in Iran, it's called Westoxification. Originally the term was coined by Jalal al-Ahmad, who was a communist revolutionary before time of Islamic Republic. And people are, I see it a lot among the younger folks here that they're seeing past that and challenging this Westoxified view that some of their relatives may have expressed to them, and so there's hope, I think, and I hope I answered your question. I'm not sure if I caught the right parts of it. So.
No, I think it's great, and apologies for those who wanted their questions asked specifically. What I did is I wrapped a few together to get the point across. So I might have not asked your question verbatim, but I tried to convey a few. I just want to thank our wonderful panelists for dedicating your time. I know it's late where you are, it's early here for me, but thank you very much. If you have any additional questions, feel free to email us. Our information has been shared by Karen in the chat. She's been quite active. And please stay tuned to future activities, future engagements. And again, thank you very much for participating. Have a great evening and stay vigilant. Take care.
Thank you so much.